Woo! Just one or two things to talk about today. Hello and welcome back to my knitting channel. My name is Nadine and you can find me at yourknittingbestie on Instagram, Ravelry and here on YouTube. On this channel, I like to chat about what it's like to be an Aussie knitter, knitting here in sunny Brisbane, or actually not quite so sunny today. It's fairly overcast, which is why I've dressed a little bit brighter today to try and offset the weather. I'm very excited because today I've got a whole bunch of projects to talk to you about. I've got one finished object, 3 whips, 1 acquisition and 1 plan, which I'm very excited to get started on. So that's what we have in store today, and I might jump straight into the first project that I have, which was my first finished object. This is really cool, actually, really exciting for me, because this is the first pair of socks that I've ever knit for myself, and maybe like the 4th or 5th sock that I've knit overall in my knitting career. So I'll put it up here. I love this yarn. This is some yarn that I just bought from the local makers markets close to where I live. There's a lady called Linda, and I think her brand is called Mophead by Linda, and she does her own hand-dyed yarn. So the main colour, that speckled, well not speckled, but the highly variegated yarn here, I think it's called Sherbet. And then I also bought a set of minis, hand-dyed minis. I'm not sure if they actually had names for them, but I've got a couple colours that I used for the toe, the cuff and the heel. And I actually switched around the colours, so you can see I've got the same colour on the cuff and the toe, and then a slightly different one on the heel. And then to keep it interesting, on the other sock I switched the placement of the colours. So the colour that was on the heel of the first sock, I put on the cuff and the toe of the second sock. And that little change was enough to keep me interested in knitting the second sock. So in terms of process, I used the same sock pattern that I've been really liking at the minute, which is the I'm So Basic pattern by Summer Lee Designs. And she has a fantastic video that goes along with that pattern. So it was very helpful to get my head around some of the different techniques since I'm relatively new to sock knitting. And I was using little 9-inch circulars, which I'd recently bought from Geogradient. And they're definitely I'm still getting used to them. It's definitely, I think the first time I picked it up, it felt a little bit like I was knitting with toothpicks because I was using the smaller version of the needle that comes in the set. So I knit the first sock, which was, oh gosh, which one was it? I think it was this one. I knit the whole thing on the 9-inch circulars. But I ended up having a little bit of pain in my hands after knitting that one. So then I cast on the second sock using the 9-inch circulars, but only got until about here before deciding that I had to switch, I think, to magic loop. So I wandered off to my local yarn store and bought 2 cables, longer cables, which work with the interchangeable sock needles that I bought. And I switched to doing the magic loop for the remainder of the second sock. And it was much easier on my hands, but a little bit of a different experience again to get used to knitting with the small needles using magic loop instead of just knitting around in the round. But it made a big difference to the kind of comfort in my hands when I was knitting the sock. So I think I actually am a convert to magic loop knitting for socks. In terms of the fit, I was pretty pleased. I knit the size medium from the pattern, which I believe is around 64 stitches, which was also what I used for the last pair I made for a gift knit for Christmas. And they fit pretty well. I've been wearing these already around, actually in the office. When my feet get a little bit cold, I just pop them on as I'm sitting there because I'm a lawyer, so I sit and review contracts for hours, and sometimes my feet get a little cold in the office. So these have been perfect to have a touch of cozy warmth to make contracts a little bit better to look at. The fit has been pretty good, so I'm particularly happy with the length of the foot. That seems to be going well, but it is, I think, a smidge loose. So I'll come to talk about a little bit later. One of my whips is another set of socks, and I adjusted down the number of stitches that I cast on to see if I can get a smidge of a tighter fit. But overall, I absolutely love these socks as my first ever pair of socks for myself. I love how bright they are. I even love the kind of imperfections that you can see, particularly in this one, from the changes in tension where I switched to magic loop, because that's okay, it just makes it a little bit more unique and reminds me of learning to knit socks. So I'm very happy with them, but I realized trying to get them to show up properly here on the screen that I probably need to get some of those blockers so that there's something a bit firm in them so it's easier to show you and maybe easier to take some pictures as well. So that's the first one. Nice and quick and nice and easy. And I'm hopeful that I'm well on my way to getting better at knitting socks, which was one of my intentions for 2024 that I spoke about in my earlier video. And actually the only other thing on these socks is that, because I knit the I'm So Basic socks once before, but I'd skipped the slip stitch heel that the pattern calls for because I was getting used to using the needles and it just seemed all a bit difficult. But I did try the slip stitch heel this time, and I really like how it looks. I really like it. Seems to create a slightly thicker fabric on the heel, which I think will mean it hopefully wears a little bit better and doesn't wear out so easily. So very pleased and happy to have them to pop on in the office. Okay, so the next object is a whip, and it is one again I mentioned in my 2024 knitting intentions video because it incorporates a different construction, which is something that I was super excited to try out. And it is the Rebel Cardigan by AnkeStrick. I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. I'm positive that I said that wrong, but we have to have a crack, don't we? Okay, so I love this project. So it's going to maybe be a little bit difficult to show you here on screen. Maybe I'll put up a picture instead. But it is coming together really well. It's in the... So I'm just getting the yarn here. I used the... I think you say this. Is it Isaiah? Isaiah. Maybe? Isaiah yarn in alpaca too. The Australian accent, I'm sure, absolutely massacres that name, because if I hadn't heard that other people say Isaiah, I would have said Isiga, which just doesn't feel right. As soon as I said it, I just thought that is not how these people meant for their name to be pronounced. So I hope Isaiah is actually the correct way to say it, but let me know if I'm wrong. And this is a beautiful yarn. So it is 50% alpaca, 50% wool, and it's just got such a different feel to it to other yarn that I've been used to working with. It's just got an incredible softness, but it does look like it has very good stitch definition because the yarn has a nice twist to it. So it's, it does show your stitches, but then it has the kind of longer hairs that you see oops, off screen, has the kind of a bit of a halo that you see from the alpaca coming through. So it's a really, really nice yarn to use. It has been a bit of a struggle because of the color. It's such a dark color, so of course it feels like it's almost impossible to read the stitches on my work as I'm going, which I realized in this project is something that I rely very heavily on to keep my place in my pattern, and to see where I'm up to and all of that sort of thing. And I think this is the darkest yarn that I've ever worked with. And I actually bought it originally for my partner because last year we had planned to do an overseas trip where we might have been in some cooler weather. So I got very excited and thought that I would buy a whole heap of the Isaiah yarn to make a pattern for him or make a project with him, self-drafted, for a hat and a matching scarf, which I thought would go really well with his colouring. And I guess in my mind, because this is it's pretty thin yarn, what is it? Fingering or light fingering, I think. So it would be on tiny needles if you just held it in a single strand. So me sitting there with tiny, tiny needles with a very, very dark yarn, it was definitely going to be a labour of love to make that project. But we ended up deciding not to go for the holiday, so I just had all of this beautiful yarn languishing in my stash. So of course I had to try and find a nice project to get some use out of it. And when I saw this pattern from the Rebel Cardigan, I was determined to make this yarn work for the project. I'm not sure if it actually is the perfect yarn for the project. I mean, it has this incredible feel to it and lovely drape to it as well. But I think the gauges, the fabric that is made is just slightly off, I think. And that's because you could kind of see when I held it up. I used, what needle am I using here? 4mm needles, and I'm holding this yarn double. And that gave me the correct gauge for the pattern, but it did create a little bit of a looser fabric, I think. So if you hold it up to the light, you can kind of see through the fabric just a little bit, nothing too crazy. And I knit up my gauge swatch, and I was looking at it, and it just had this beautiful drape to it, beautiful feel, loved the color. It had the right number of stitches, and I ended up thinking if it is a little bit of a looser gauge, that's going to be totally fine for me. And also kind of when you hold, when the pieces are together, it does create a nice solid fabric. It's just kind of when it's held up against the light. So I hope it will actually be okay when I'm wearing it. So fingers crossed, because I absolutely love the colour. I think this will be a wonderful addition to my closet and something that I can get a lot of wear out of, both in the office and just wearing it casually as well. So I have knit this in, gosh, what's the size that I knit this in? I think I knit this in medium or large. I'll put it on the screen because I've forgotten right now. But I think I knit the slightly smaller size because I knew that the fabric might grow just a smidge, and I think with some wear as well, I thought it might continue to stretch just a little bit. So that's what I've decided to go for in sizing. I guess we'll see if it turns out well for me. And I also wanted to do a size that was very, definitely the recommended size in the pattern to make sure that the shoulder fit was as good as it looks to be for other people who've knit this pattern. So that's where we're at here. It was a really exciting journey to knit the yoke, because I wonder if you can see, you can see here, you kind of knit the band at first along the side here, and then you end up picking up stitches in a whole bunch of different directions until you eventually have this beautiful yoke that can separate to sleeves. And it was just such a smart way to do a cardigan yoke. And it was just really interesting to knit as I was going through and doing it. And I'm totally stoked on it. So I think I might actually try it on. I wonder if I can, can I be bothered to put it on some cord? Oh, I think it'll be okay. Let's see. Pop it on. Ooh, careful. Ooh. Haha. Okay. So it's a little bit cramped because I've kept it on the needles here. So it can't stretch to quite its full potential. But I hope you can see just how well that sits here. So the way they've done the pattern, it kind of comes up the neck here. So it sits high, and then the shoulders are kind of constructed to sit right on the top of your shoulders here as well. So it is, I think, oh no, I definitely just took it off the needles there. Oh my goodness, hold. Ooh. Okay. Oh, that'll teach me to not put it on some cord when I'm trying it on. So as you can see, I kind of knit the yoke. I got to split to the sleeves, and then I knit until the end of the balls that I was using after splitting for the sleeves. And then I went back and I'm going to knit both sleeves because I think I might run out of yarn. So I'm going to do both sleeves and then continue knitting on the body and see how far we get, because at the moment it is kind of a very cropped cardigan. Very cropped. So, I mean, I do love a cropped cardigan, but I think that might be a smidge too short. So we'll see how the rest of the body goes. Fortunately, this yarn is in stock at my local yarn store, so if I need a couple more skeins of yarn, it's no trouble to duck down and get some more. So that's fortunate, because it would suck to have to wait for the shipping, or I call it shipping, but of course it is just postage. So the other exciting thing is that on this pattern, I've done my very first tubular bind off. I just did it this morning, and it was a bit of an endeavour. I watched a video by Lily Kate Makes, who was wonderful. I have her on Instagram, and I love her designs and her content. And she had a video on how to do the tubular bind off for 1x1 rib, which I watched first, and then I ended up using a written description of the steps from a website that I'll pop in the description box to carry out the rest of the bind off, instead of kind of rewatching the video over and over and over again. And it was definitely new and unfamiliar at the start for the first maybe quarter of the stitches, but after that you kind of pretty easily get into a rhythm with the tubular bind off, and it does create a really beautiful, oops, beautiful neat edge. I think maybe mine's a little bit untidy because it's my first one, but that's okay. We're allowed to be a little bit bad at things when we first start out. But I can see why people use it instead of the standard bind off in pattern, which creates that kind of hard line at the end. Whereas this one does just continue the pattern and look very professional and neat. So I've stopped a smidge shorter than I would usually, which is a bit of a gamble, but I think again that it'll grow a smidge when I block it. So I'm hoping that I'm right on that and I don't end up regretting that decision, because honestly I would have no idea how to undo the tubular bind off so that I could knit it a little bit more. And you'll see along the side here that I've got a whole bunch of stitch markers. I ended up putting one at each decrease along the sleeve, and that was because the yarn was so dark. I was sat there on the couch knitting, trying to figure out how many I'd done, and because the yarn is so dark, I was just squinting at the fabric and couldn't actually pick it out. I was just like, yeah, it was a bit difficult, and I just couldn't see it at all. I felt blind. So I ended up waiting until the morning with some natural light, and then I could identify the little SSK stitches along the sleeve to put a marker in to finally see where I was up to. So yeah, that's this one. I'm very excited to finish it off, even just to get the second sleeve done, and then I might block it after that to see how the fit's going and to judge how much the body grows in blocking, to see if I do actually need to go and get some more yarn. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, is this a pattern that you've considered doing? Because if so, I would encourage you to go ahead and have a crack. It's a lovely project. Rightio, so my second whip is one that I think will be familiar to a lot of people who have been on Instagram and watching YouTube videos for the last little while. I'll put it on screen and then I'm sure you'll identify it immediately. It's almost too big to fit on screen here. There we go. That end will give you a good idea as well. So this is, of course, the Geogradient Mystery Knit-Along by Stephen West, or West Knits. And I'm way behind on knitting this one. This started in October last year, which was around my birthday. So I actually convinced my partner to select my colours for me because I was stuck on which ones to pick out to make sure that there was enough of a gradient and, you know, all of that sort of thing. So because a whole bunch of yarn stores here in Australia had put together, and internationally, but with shipping, would prefer places here in Australia. So because so many places had put together kits for the knit-along, I was able to just send some links to my partner and ask him to pick out a kit for me and to have it delivered for the correct date so that I could cast on when the mystery knit-along started. And of course, gosh, there was all that drama at the start, which I feel probably I don't even really need to go into because it was really a thing for a little while there, wasn't it? It was everywhere. But quickly, for those of you who weren't following along the drama, maybe you weren't doing the project so you didn't see it, but the initial Clue 1, which was first released when the pattern went live, it had a pattern on it which looked uncomfortably like a bit of a hate symbol. And a lot of people disagreed on whether did resemble that, and it was a whole thing. But Stephen West ended up saying, I'd like everyone to redo Clue 1 using just this kind of radiating square pattern. And I think a lot of people took him up on that. Some people went ahead with the original Clue 1, which I have to say looked technically very interesting, whereas the first clue here was a little bit more simple. Although personally, I found casting on this square at the centre and those first original stitches around it very difficult. I had to cast on a couple times and rip out and start again to try and get that bit right. And I felt a little bit better actually because I was in a Facebook group for the knit along, and I saw that a lot of other people also had trouble with that first stage of Clue 1. So I was a bit relieved that it wasn't just me struggling with that, because this is my first mystery knit along. And I was really excited because I know they're really known for being technically interesting, where you might learn a new technique or two. So I was very interested. Anyway, so I ended up doing a slightly different Clue 1. As you can see, I think it ends about here. Oh no, it ends here. That's where it ends. No, oh, does it? Actually, no, I can't remember. Anyway, the first clue I ended up doing differently, and I added the eyelets in. And then, of course, the next clue was released, and the next clue also included eyelets. So I ended up doing a solid, oops, where is it? A solid stretch just here to break up the eyelets from Clue 1 to Clue 2. And I quite like how that came out. So I've got the instructions in my Ravelry project for this one. And so I started Clue 3, which is this one here at the end. And the pattern was really interesting to do. I'd never done that sort of elongated slip stitch before to create this beautiful wave pattern. But gosh, it really felt like that section took a really long time. And I'll put a picture up which shows perhaps why I have taken a bit of a break after doing this first section, because the ends, oh my gosh, there were so many ends. And I know he says to do the weave and Steven technique, but I am simply too neurotic for a technique like that. I needed some more comfort that my ends were securely in place and neatly as well, or as neatly as I could make it. So I saw a video here on YouTube about a different technique of weaving in your ends as you go for this project, and I'll put the link down below in case you're like me, you're still working on this project. But it was using the same technique that people use for color work to carry floats, and I found that hid the yarn at the back that you're weaving in a much neater way. So that's the technique I used where I could. But when I got to this last bit of Clue 3, it didn't work because you just couldn't do it because of the slip stitches. I found it didn't work as well. So I ended up just for each end tying the old colour and the new colour in a knot, and then put both ends through a tapestry needle and weaved them in a couple stitches together, and then just cut it and called that good enough. And that created this look at the back. I'll just see if you can see that. Yeah, so you can see it's not super neat, but you know what? I think it's good enough, because this whole thing will just be scrunched up around your neck anyway, right? So I think it'll be okay. So I still have to do Clue 3 on the other side, and then I honestly don't know if I will go ahead and do Clue 4. It's possibly because I just lost a little bit of momentum on this project, because there was, all of the drama around the start, and I was a little bit on the fence of how I was going to deal with that conundrum. And then also, straight after it was released, my sister's wedding happened, which is very exciting, but that meant that I had some projects for her wedding, which had to take precedence. And I also had some relatives over from Canada, and I was very much prioritizing seeing them while they were here over knitting on this project. And then everyone finished, and I think I was just too far behind to catch up. So it's just been languishing a little bit. But I am determined to finish this in a way that I'm happy with, because the yarn that I used is really so beautiful. My partner did a great job at picking out this yarn combination. Even the back of the work looks so pretty for this project. It is a really beautiful project. But the yarn he bought me was he ended up picking a set from the Skein Sisters down in, I think, Sydney. And I was very excited because I get their newsletter. I've signed up for their newsletter, which is sent out every Friday. And it's a great way to end the work week. They have a little bit of news about themselves in there and what new yarns and everything they have. So I've been really wanting to try to purchase something from their store to support them. And this is actually using their own yarn line, I think, which they recently came out with. I think this one is called the Romance yarn, and it has, I think, a bit of wool in it and a little bit of silk in it as well. So I'll put that up on the screen. And my partner, when he was looking at the websites for the different patterns, for the different yarns, for the different yarn, what do you call them, kits, he was like, okay, oh gosh, which one should I get you? And I was like, well, that's kind of, that's the present that you're giving me, is making that decision. So he goes, okay, well, I think I'll just get the more expensive one because that's what I would want. And I was like, yes, that will do quite well, thank you. So he picked very well, and he actually picked the exact colours that I was hoping he would pick. And he said that it was a safe bet because it was in my colour scheme. And we say that because back when he first started coming over for dinner and that sort of thing, we joked that everything in my house, all of the accents, were one particular colour. So he thought that would be a safe bet. So I will get through that one eventually. But it is taking a really long time. I don't even know if I can say that I'm team sloth at this point. I'm kind of team rock. Going nowhere. But we'll get there. We'll get there in the end. Okay, so this is a very new cast on this last whip, but it's one I'm super excited about. So this is using, the Regia Perfect yarn by Anne and Carlos, who is super fun. Definitely some people I like to hang out with on YouTube. So I was pretty excited when I saw that they had contributed patterns to the Perfect line, because they're super nice. I mean, isn't that lovely? So the whole shtick with this yarn is that there's this guide yellow yarn, which you cut off and then you start knitting after that on your first sock. You have to knit cuff down. I think they said, I just looked at their website last night when I cast this on, and I think they said around 64 stitches if you're knitting for a man, and around 60 stitches if you're knitting for someone who's more petite. So that's the one I ended up casting on, which I'm interested to see if that'll make this sock fit a little more snugly and better than the first pair of socks. I'm using a US 1 needle, and as you can see, I'm going for magic loop on this one for the whole sock. And I think I'm going to do a short row heel to see how that goes. And I'm also using a 2x2 rib on the cuff instead of a 1x1 rib, just to change it up a little bit. And I really like the idea of having a sock on the go all the time, because there's so much kind of easy, mindless knitting in between. You know, the only hard bit really that you have to think about is the heel, and then also quickly for the toe, but the toe is pretty straightforward, I feel. So there's a lot of easy knitting to be done. So it's a good car project. So I'm very pleased to have it there for some easy knitting for when I'm in front of the TV or hanging out with some friends or whichever. So on to acquisitions, and I only have one acquisition. I try my best not to go crazy on buying yarn. I try to only buy it when I have a project in mind, and that's really because, well, you know, it does take some resources to buy yarn, particularly the nice stuff. So I try to be good. But I also find that if I have a whole bunch of yarn in my stash that I don't have a plan for, it does just tend to sit there for a while. And then if I get really inspired to cast on a new project, I always want to buy new yarn for it anyway. So, and it also just gets out of control very quickly if I allow myself to buy yarn when I don't have a project in mind. So that's how I try to approach purchasing yarn, but it doesn't always work. But anyway, so this acquisition that I have, it is one skein of yarn. I'll put it up here. Isn't it just the most beautiful yarn? I really love speckled yarn at the moment, and I love the colours that are coming up in this one. So it's a nice, I think, neutral sort of base with the light blue, but then it's got so many nice colourful speckles through it. So this is I think it's the Life in the Long Grass, and this is 20% silk, 80% superwash merino wool in the colour Rain. And this was $46 from my local yarn store. Hand dyed in their studio in the Irish countryside. How cool. So I really, really love this yarn. And this is destined to be a gift knit for one of my cousins in Canada. And I'm thinking what I'd like for it to be is just a little scarf to, you know, quickly wrap up around their neck. Similar to the Sophie scarf, but I have knit a heap of Sophie scarves recently. So I might look for a slightly different pattern to use this skein for. But that is one I'm very excited to get started on. And then the last thing that I have kind of on my list for right now, I always have a whole bunch of projects planned in my head, but one that's immediate is one that a friend would like to knit. So one of my gal pals texted me the other day with a screenshot of something from TikTok, and it was the vest #1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. And she said, Nadine, you have to teach me how to knit because I would love to make this vest. And immediately I kind of freaked out because I was like, okay, oh my gosh, yes, this is going to be excellent. She's going to learn how to knit. She's going to love knitting. We're going to hang out and knit together all the time. It's going to be great. And then I thought to myself, okay, Nadine, you have to calm down. Be cool. You're going to scare her off. And then, of course, I replied in like all caps, being like, yes, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'll look up yarn. I'll get the pattern. So anyway, long story short, I think I'm going to be making the vest #1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. So I've had a quick look at where we might get some yarn for this pattern. What was it? I can't remember exactly what stitch gauge it was. 17 stitches maybe? Anyway, one of the suggested yarns was the Heavy Merino by Knitting for Olive, which I think would be beautiful. And I love the Knitting for Olive yarns generally, and I haven't used the Heavy Merino. So I was pretty keen to use that, but it does look to be in limited supply around these parts of the world. I found one website which stocked it, but it was pretty much out of stock already because I think I would need maybe 4 or 5 balls of the yarn, and there were only a couple colours where that much was available. So we'll see. The other yarn which I think is on the list to use is, what is it? Drops Air, I believe. And I found a store which has a pretty good selection of Drops Air, which would ship for a reasonable price. So I think that's probably what I'm going to try to use. And I'm interested to try that yarn as well because I think it's a blown yarn, which they said in the description was something like 30% lighter than other yarns, which would be good for our climate because, yeah, it's a little bit of a chunkier gauge, which generally I stay away from. I like to use a finer gauge for thinner material here in Australia, in Brisbane. So I think the lighter yarn will be helpful. So I'm very excited to cast that one on. We're going to have a coffee and pick out our colours and get the yarn delivered. So that'll be super exciting to get started on. Rightio, so that brings us to the end of another video. My very first kind of proper podcast format with FOs and whips and acquisitions. So it was very exciting for me to film, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much to the couple people who have subscribed to my channel. It is 100% my friends and family at the moment, and you guys are very, very lovely for supporting me in this new endeavor. So thank you so much. And if you liked this video, it would be amazing if you would give it a like, maybe even leave a comment for me to have a look at. And if you really felt like spoiling me, you might hit subscribe as well, so that you'll know when I put out my next video. So thank you again for coming to hang out with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.